This is the story of a lioness who not only saved an innocent human child, but also nurtured it by feeding it her own milk. This lioness would sit alongside the king of Egypt on his throne, and this tale will leave you amazed. This was no ordinary lioness, my friends. This story will truly astonish you. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe. That day, the king was seated in a special chamber, working on important documents. It was his habit to finish his tasks after the night prayer so that he wouldn't face any trouble in the morning. The king always ensured that all his responsibilities were completed beforehand, as he had to hold court the next day. He had just started working when suddenly there was a soft knock on the door. The king immediately turned towards the door, setting aside the documents. He didn't want anyone to know what he worked on in that particular chamber at that hour. He was always cautious about who in his court was loyal to him and who wasn't. The king preferred to keep his work private, to the extent that even his other hand wouldn't know what one hand was doing. Taking a deep breath, he allowed the person outside to enter. As the door opened, a beautiful smile appeared on the king's face. Standing there was his trusted minister, whose eyes were lowered. The king knew why the minister's gaze was downcast, and the reason behind it. With a gentle smile, the king allowed him in, saying in a warm tone, "Our work is done. You may come in. There is no secrecy with you. I trust you more than myself." Hearing this, the minister smiled and entered. Bowing respectfully, he greeted the king, who responded in an equally courteous manner. The king was known for his kind-hearted and cheerful nature. He was humble and treated everyone with generosity, especially his minister, as he deeply valued the minister's loyalty. The minister never hesitated to risk his life for the king, and the king held such individuals in high regard. Looking at the minister, the king asked gently, "Is everything all right? What brings you here?" The minister nodded slightly and, in a traditional manner, said, "Your Majesty, if I may seek permission to speak." The king gestured for him to continue. The minister then explained, "Your Majesty, a servant of the governor of Egypt visited just a while ago. The governor has sent a special message and wishes to meet you. He seeks some of your time and would be forever grateful if you grant it." The king remained silent for a moment before asking, "Why does the governor wish to meet me?" The minister expressed his unawareness of the reasons. This left the king in a state of contemplation. He had previously met governors from various cities but had always visited them personally. Why would the governor of Egypt want to meet him? This was puzzling. Nevertheless, the king, showing his magnanimity, agreed to meet the governor the next day after the afternoon prayer. Hearing this, the minister bowed respectfully and quietly left. However, the king was now deeply engrossed in thought. Why did the governor of Egypt wish to meet him? The king always sought reasons behind every encounter. He neither met anyone without purpose nor wasted his time. The king was an early riser. After performing the morning prayer, he would spend time with his wife before heading to the court to meet his subjects, address their grievances, and then retreat to his private chamber. He would only return after the night prayer. Yet, that night, he couldn't shake off what the minister had told him. It was not a trivial matter. The night passed with the king lost in thought, unable to sleep even after the late-night prayer. Usually, he would take a short nap, but this night was unusually restless. He only managed to sleep after the morning prayer. When the first rays of the sun broke through, he woke up immediately, feeling somewhat at ease. The king took a bath and performed ablution, as he always remained in a state of ablution to keep his mind focused and free from distractions. Emerging from the bathroom, he found his wife awake. She greeted him with a warm "good morning," and they proceeded to have breakfast together in the grand dining hall, where a splendid table was set. The king found all such extravagances unnecessary. and often instructed everyone not to prepare such luxurious meals for him. He preferred to lead a simple and peaceful life. However, his wife always ensured that such meals were prepared as a token of her service to her husband. The king joined her for breakfast and then promptly headed to the court. Upon his arrival, all the ministers and advisors stood up in respect, their voices echoing with greetings. The king acknowledged their greetings with a slight nod of his head and moved toward his seat. Once seated, he inquired about everyone's well-being before beginning the day's proceedings. The king didn't wish to waste much time that day because he had an important meeting with the governor of Egypt later. Knowing this meeting might consume a significant portion of his day, he intended to complete his afternoon tasks by midday. The courtroom doors were opened, and one by one the petitioners presented their cases. The king was known for his kind demeanor and treated his subjects with great compassion, ensuring they felt comfortable presenting their issues. The court concluded just before midday, and the king retired to his private chamber. Moments later, the call to prayer echoed, and the king immediately paused his work to perform the midday prayer. He laid down his prayer mat, closed his eyes, and envisioned the Kaaba as was his habit during prayers. After completing his prayer, he raised his hands in supplication, addressing his Lord, "O Lord of Mustafa, O King of Kings, O my Master, glory be to you. Everything is insignificant before you. O Lord of Mustafa, grant acceptance to my every prayer. Today I am to meet the governor of Egypt. Bestow upon me the strength and wisdom to conduct this meeting with grace. Let there be no matter that might create discord between us." He prayed earnestly for a long time, as was his habit whenever faced with a difficult situation. Despite being a great and mighty king, he never shied away from seeking his Lord's help in matters big or small. His faith lightened his heart, providing him clarity and peace. After concluding his prayer, the king resumed his duties, and by late afternoon, he had cleared his desk of all important documents, leaving no room for misplaced trust. Shortly afterward, his minister informed him that the governor of Egypt had arrived. The king granted permission for the governor to be presented, and soon there was a knock on the door of his private chamber. The king, in a commanding voice, allowed the visitor to enter. The door opened, and the governor of Egypt walked in, dressed in formal attire, exuding respect and dignity. The king stood up, although he could have chosen to remain seated, considering his stature as the sovereign of the realm. However, it was his custom to stand and honor any guest who came to meet him, as he valued everyone equally. The king warmly embraced the governor, whose delight was evident on his face. The governor's joy knew no bounds. He struggled to express his gratitude to the king. The king invited him to sit, took his own seat, and then attentively listened as the governor began to speak. "Your Majesty, you are exactly as I had heard, gracious and noble. Words cannot express my gratitude." The king, curious, asked, "Why do you wish to thank me? Is there a particular reason?" The governor smiled modestly and continued, "Your Majesty, granting me this meeting is reason enough for gratitude. Additionally, you have made countless sacrifices for Egypt. You have restored our lands, uplifted us from the turmoil we were trapped in, and brought prosperity to our region. For these reasons, I have brought you a special gift from the jungle as a token of my gratitude." The king was intrigued. Was this the true purpose of the governor's visit? He studied the governor's face closely, sensing that there might be a deeper reason behind the meeting. However, he chose to remain silent and continued observing him. The governor then rose and humbly sought the king's permission to present the gift he had brought. The king gave a slight nod, his face radiating seriousness. For a moment, the governor felt nervous but quickly steadied himself, instructing his attendants to immediately present the gift brought for the king. The order was swiftly obeyed, and a large cage covered with a bright red cloth was brought before them. The king, with a frown on his brow, stared at the cage, uncertain of its contents. Before he could say anything, the governor stepped forward, removed the cloth in a single motion, and revealed the gift inside. A faint smile appeared on the king's face as he stood from his seat. Inside the cage was a lion cub, seemingly only a few days old. The governor, showing great courage, knelt to open the cage door. Gently, he picked up the cub in his arms and approached the king. Speaking humbly, he said, "Your Majesty, I present this lion cub as a token of my respect. I wasn't sure what you might like, given your simple and modest lifestyle. If you were like other kings, I would have arranged a grand feast or brought luxurious gifts. However, I know how much you love animals and value every living being. So this cub felt like the most suitable offering. If it pleases you, I hope you will accept it." The king smiled, sheathed his sword, and extended his hands toward the governor, signaling his desire to hold the cub. The governor hesitated, unsure if it was appropriate for the king to hold the animal himself. But, understanding his place, he silently handed over the cub. The king gently caressed the cub, a warm smile gracing his face. The cub seemed to relax in his arms, finding the comfort it had been seeking. The governor, too, smiled, relieved and pleased that his gift was well received. The king looked up at the governor and said warmly, "Thank you very much. I genuinely love this gift. Please take a seat." He then returned to his seat, and the governor appeared delighted, knowing his purpose for the visit had been fulfilled. The king continued to stroke the cub's back lovingly, and the young lion appeared content in his arms. For a while, the governor engaged in conversation with the king, expressing his gratitude and sharing updates. After some time, he took his leave, thanking the king once more before departing for Egypt. As the governor exited the chamber, the king's gaze lingered on his retreating figure. A sense of unease crept into his heart, as though the visit signified something ominous. Yet, brushing it off as a fleeting worry, he turned his attention back to the cub. He genuinely adored the little creature, but a pang of sadness struck him as he considered its circumstances. The cub was far too young, a newborn torn from its mother to serve as a gift. A surge of compassion overcame the king as memories of his own childhood surfaced, of the day he lost his mother. He remembered vividly the pain of that loss and how it had marked him forever. No matter one's age, the loss of a parent leaves a void that can never be filled, especially when the parent was one who poured their love and soul into their child. Tears welled in the king's eyes as he recalled his mother's death. Even now, the memory robbed him of sleep on countless nights. Despite his status as a great and powerful ruler, he often felt helpless in the face of such memories, regretting that he could do nothing to save her. But such is the way of the world. Everyone must leave this temporary abode, for the ultimate destination lies in the hereafter. Lost in thought, the king was brought back to the present when the cub shifted in his arms, attempting to climb up on him. A soft smile spread across his face as he realized the cub wanted to play. Understanding the cub's needs, the king immediately arranged for milk, as it was far too young to be without it. Though unable to provide its mother's milk, he made do with what was available. The cub drank the milk contentedly, sitting beside the king. Afterward, the king also arranged for some meat, ensuring the cub was well fed. Despite the king's private chamber being a space where even humans rarely entered, he allowed the lion cub to remain there. This chamber was sacred to him, a place where he spent most of his time. Yet, he felt a profound connection with the tiny creature. It was young, vulnerable, and without parents, much like how the king had once felt. The king treated the cub with utmost care, as if it were a part of his own heart. Shortly after, arrangements were made for meat, and the king silently resolved to raise the cub into a strong and mighty lion. Once the cub had calmly eaten its fill, the king lifted it in his arms and proceeded toward his private chamber. He knew his wife was terrified of animals, and he relished the light-hearted teasing this often led to. After all, a playful back and forth between spouses is the foundation of a lively relationship. As he entered the chamber, he found his wife sitting on the bed, lost in deep thought. The moment she saw him, she lit up and sprang to approach him, only to freeze in her tracks when her eyes fell on the lion cub cradled in his arms. With a loud shriek, she jumped onto the bed and stood there, visibly alarmed. In a panicked tone, she exclaimed, "Your Majesty, what is this? Who have you brought into the room now?" The king, suppressing a smile, looked at her and teased, "My dear queen, you're reacting as if this is something extraordinary. It's just a little baby. Come, hold it and show it some love. You're the queen of this kingdom." Imagine what people would say if they found out the queen was afraid of a tiny newborn lion. He said this playfully and sat down in front of her. However, his wife, clearly unsettled, implored him, "For God's sake, Your Majesty, take it outside. This is not a kitten, it's a lion cub. What if it loses its temper and tears us apart in seconds?" The king let out a hearty laugh, looking at his wife as he replied, "Oh, my naive wife, nothing of the sort will happen. It's far too young for that. Its teeth aren't even fully developed yet. Come closer, my love. Let's show it some affection together." This cub was a gift from the governor, and from today, it will live with us. You should get used to it. Despite his reassurances, the queen didn't move an inch from her spot. Noticing her persistent fear, the king smiled gently and immediately called for the cage the governor had brought for the cub. In front of his wife, he placed the cub inside the cage, locked it securely, and turned back to her with a grin. "There, my dear. Is this better, or are you still worried?" Relieved, the queen finally approached him, resting her head on his arm. Although her face still bore signs of unease, she managed to smile and said, "It's adorable, Your Majesty, but why must it stay in our room? What if it breaks out of the cage at night and attacks us? Please try to understand. Loving animals is a wonderful thing, but some creatures require caution. If we raise this lion in our home, it will eventually become so powerful that it won't spare us either." The king listened patiently, smiling as he shook his head. "No, my dear, that's not how it works. If we raise this cub with care, allow it to play with us, and feed it on time, it will grow attached to us and never harm us. Instead, it will become our protector. Sometimes I have to leave for battles, and you're left alone. If this cub grows up with us, it will safeguard you in my absence. I've made this decision thoughtfully, so please don't overthink and stress yourself unnecessarily." The queen, though unconvinced, chose to remain silent, understanding that it wasn't the right time to argue further. The night slowly passed, and at the hour of Tahajjud, the king awoke. The cold winter night enveloped the world in stillness, with every soul nestled in its slumber. The king, step by step, approached the cage where the lion cub lay fast asleep. Smiling, he softly said, "Many in this world have been loyal to us, while many more have betrayed us. Today, I want to test you. Will you grow up to be loyal, or will you reveal your true nature?" With these words, he left for the bathroom, performed ablution, and offered tahajjud with heartfelt devotion. Afterward, he glanced at the cub and, lost in thought, picked up the Quran. Sitting near the cub, he began reciting. The sacred atmosphere of the room resonated with the king's beautiful voice, pure and serene. The sound of his recitation startled the cub, awakening it suddenly. The little lion fixed its gaze on the king, captivated by his voice. Moments later, the queen too stirred awake. Seeing her husband reciting the Quran with such devotion, a smile spread across her face as she watched him fondly. And so, the night melted away, drop by drop, as the king's voice filled the room, a harmony of faith and affection binding them all. The next morning, the sun shone brightly, as if a golden veil had been draped across the world. The king arrived at court with the lion cub in his arms, receiving a grand reception. Everyone was curious about the cub, marveling at it with fascination. The king, however, knew that in a few days, the cub would grow strong enough to walk alongside him. The court was abuzz with excitement as the cub caught everyone's attention. Many wished to pet it, but the cub was selective, allowing only a few to approach. Over time, the cub became an integral part of the court, and the king named it Kalbe Shuja, brave heart. The name symbolized the bond and affection the king had for the creature. As time passed, the cub grew fond of the king, playing with him, eating by his side, and never leaving his presence. The king, in turn, treated the cub as a member of his household. Its presence became a symbol of the king's authority, instilling fear in anyone who dared to think of wrongdoing. People began to tread carefully, avoiding any actions that might incur the king's wrath, knowing well that his lion could be unleashed upon them. One morning, the court was unusually tense. A string of troubling cases had been presented, but the king handled them with his usual composure. Seated next to him, Kalbe Shuja sat tall, its piercing gaze making its presence felt. Suddenly, a man burst into the courtroom, weeping uncontrollably and drawing everyone's attention. Even Kalbe Shuja looked at him curiously, sensing the gravity of the situation. The man fell to his knees before the king, pressing his forehead to the ground, and cried out, "Your Majesty, a grave injustice has been done. My life has been ruined by the one I trusted the most. I have nothing left, and my heart is shattered beyond repair." The anguish in his voice moved the king deeply. The man continued, "Allah blessed me with 4 daughters, precious gifts I cherish more than anything in this world. I never longed for sons, for my daughters are the pride of my life. But the world is cruel, Your Majesty. Ever since my daughters were born, I have been tormented with taunts. You have 4 daughters. You must do so much for them. I have accepted this as my fate and lived with dignity, raising my daughters with love and care. My eldest, Jahan Ara, recently developed a passion for learning the Quran with proper tajweed. She began attending a madrasa every afternoon, walking alone because there is no other male in our home to accompany her. At first, everything seemed fine, but one vile man noticed her and began harassing her. My daughter, being strong and dignified, ignored him, thinking it best not to create a scene. She thought this was just another test of life. But, Your Majesty, that man's actions escalated. When he realized my daughter would not respond to his vile words, he mistook her silence for consent. By the 3rd day, he crossed all limits. He didn't just use his words, he laid his hands on her. He began tormenting her, using her body for his wicked desires. My daughter, who had never raised her voice against anyone, pleaded with him to spare her, but he showed no mercy. This monster dragged her to his house, violated her, and then discarded her at my doorstep like she was nothing. The man's voice cracked as he continued, "Your Majesty, my daughter was always the light of my home. A girl who prayed 5 times a day, recited the Quran daily, and spent her nights in tahajjud. And now she is shattered. She cannot speak, cannot eat, cannot even cry. Our family has become the subject of ridicule in our community. The same people who once respected us now whisper behind our backs. My innocent child, who never wronged anyone, has been crushed by this evil man. I cannot forgive him, Your Majesty. How can I, when my daughter is lying in such a state? How can a father forgive the man who destroyed his daughter's life, her honor, and her dignity? I seek justice, and I implore you not to let this man go unpunished. My daughter deserves justice, and the world must see that no one can commit such crimes and escape your court's judgment." The court fell silent. The king's face hardened as he listened, his heart heavy with the man's grief. Even Kalbi Shuja seemed restless, sensing the tension in the room. All eyes were on the king, awaiting his response to this harrowing tale of betrayal and cruelty. The grieving father knelt before the king, his tears falling relentlessly. His voice trembled as he continued, "Your Majesty, I never wanted to bring this matter to you because I knew it would only bring disgrace to my family. But I cannot watch my daughter's life be destroyed like this. If she learns that her attacker has been punished, she might find the strength to heal. I beg you, Your Majesty, I need justice. I will never forgive this man who has reduced my daughter to a living corpse." The king's face darkened with fury. Veins bulged on his forehead, and his mind clouded with anger. He declared in a stern voice, "I promise you, this man will not be forgiven under any circumstances. If your daughter has suffered because of him, I will ensure that he pays the ultimate price. In my kingdom, there is no forgiveness for such heinous crimes. I order this man to be captured immediately and publicly executed as a lesson to others." Without delay, the king sent his guards with the man to identify the accused. Soon, the culprit was arrested and brought to the court. Preparations for the execution were made swiftly. A noose was set, and the executioner stood ready. All eyes in the court were fixed on the man who stood with his head bowed. The king, seething with rage, addressed him, "How dare you destroy the life of an innocent, pious girl? You turned her into a shadow of herself. Do you not know the punishment for such vile acts? You may have found solace in your deeds in this world, but in the next, you will answer for every crime you committed. In this court, there is no forgiveness for adultery or sexual violence. You will be executed before all, so that no one dares commit such an atrocity again." With this declaration, the king ordered the execution to proceed. As the man was led to the noose, a black cloth was placed over his head. Just as the executioner prepared to pull the lever, Kalb-e-Shuja, the lion, leaped forward. With his sharp teeth, he tore through the rope, causing the accused to fall flat on the ground. The court was stunned. The king rose to his feet, anger blazing in his eyes, as he scolded the lion, "Kalb-e-Shuja, how dare you behave like this? This is unacceptable. Come here immediately." But the lion refused to move, standing defiantly and avoiding the king's gaze. The execution was reset, and the noose was tied again. However, just as the executioner moved forward, the lion intervened once more, cutting the rope and causing the man to fall again. The king's forehead furrowed in deep thought. He could not comprehend why his loyal lion, who understood his every command, was behaving this way. Sensing something amiss, he ordered the execution to be halted. Turning to the executioner, he said, "Remove the cloth from this man's face." The executioner, though puzzled, obeyed without question. The man's face was revealed, and the king, now calmer, asked, "Kalb-e-Shuja has made it clear that you are not guilty. Tell me the truth. What is the real story?" The accused, a young and strikingly handsome man, remained silent for a long time. But when the king pressed him, he finally spoke, "Your Majesty, I am innocent. The true perpetrator is not me, but the girl's own father. She and I loved each other deeply and intended to marry. But her father could not tolerate this. Enraged, he committed the crime himself to destroy her life, believing that if she were dishonored, no one would want to marry her. To hide his sin, he accused me, knowing I had no power to defend myself." The court fell silent. The king immediately ordered an investigation. The girl's friends were questioned, and they confirmed that she had loved the young man, but was afraid to act against her father's wishes. Everything pointed to the father's guilt. Finally, when the girl herself was brought to court, her reaction was telling. At the sight of her father, she broke down, crying and screaming in fear. Her response confirmed the young man's claims. The king, with a heavy heart, pronounced the father guilty and sentenced him to death. However, the girl, despite her pain, begged the king to spare her father's life. "Please, Your Majesty," she pleaded, "do not execute him. I cannot bear the thought of losing him, despite everything he has done." Moved by her words, the king revised the sentence. Instead of execution, the father was condemned to 6 years of hard labor. To ensure the girl's well-being, the king took on the responsibility of providing for her and her family. He also publicly exonerated the young man, restoring his honor. Later, the king turned to Kalbi Shuja, stroking the lion affectionately. "You truly are my loyal companion," he said. "You saw what I could not. Today, you have proven that even animals, when treated with love and respect, can become our greatest allies. Sometimes, they show us truths that even humans fail to see." Indeed, the king reflected, animals are often more loyal than humans, embodying pure and selfless devotion.